Hi guys, this is Mrs. Hill. This is our fourth lesson in our book Megatooth. This will be our last lesson for our from our book. We will finish up our skill sheets today. We have two questions today that we will work on, both requiring a short written answer. So we'll restate part of the question. We'll restate part of that question to begin the answer. And then we will use facts from our story to complete that short written answer. Eventually, we're going to end up pulling more details from the book into an answer to make it a little lengthier. But for now, we're just going to do two parts, restate and answer. So let's take a look at our questions. Let's maybe put that number one and make this a number two. Okay. So our first question that we're going to work on today: how do scientists know how big megalodons were? Why do they think they were so huge? So we're going to take a look at that, find information from our story to finish that question. That's a two-part question, so we're going to have two sentences going. I highlighted the part that we are going to use to restate to begin our answer. We're going to say scientists know how big megalodons were because... Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and say scientists know how big megalodons were. That transition word we're going to use is because. Okay, and I'm going to circle it because you have to supply that word yourself. It's not in any, you have to use that transition word to attach the subject and the predicate. So scientists know how big megalodons were because, and then we're going to fill in the answer. I'm writing this by hand. You are going to type it in the box on your skill sheet. What I've noticed as I have been working with some people on Google Classroom assignments where I've been trying to grade them, as you type, the box kind of stretches, but then once you're done, it kind of brings it back and keeps it within that designated space. So if that's what's happening, it should be okay. The second part of that question says, why do they think they were so huge? So they is scientists. So the pronoun they is referring to the scientists, and that's perfectly okay to use the word they in a two-part question when the pronoun has replaced a noun. So we're going to say they think they were so huge were so huge. So let's wait and see if we want to use that same transition word again, or if we can come up with another one for the second part of our sentence, for the second part of our answer. So again, I just restated part of the question in the beginning of my answer, and then I'm going to take some facts from the reading and plug in here to complete that sentence. So then you have a nice complete sentence that answers your question for you. Okay, so scientists know how big megalodons were because, and they think they were so huge, and then we'll see what else we want to do to finish up that as we read. Okay. So the second question that we're going to look at: when and why do scientists think the megalodons became extinct? So there is two questions, two parts to our question here. Kind of sneaky the way that question's worded, but we're going to have two sentences again. Okay, so let's start this one by saying scientists think the megalodon became extinct. And I'm not going to use a transition word quite yet because I'm not quite sure what I want to use. But we do have to restate that. So that's why I went ahead and did it for you. We can go ahead and restate it. We know we've got to answer it, so we can just work ahead a little bit, get that done. So when we come across that information in our reading, all we have to do is plug that in. And then where it says why, we're going to come down here and say, I'll tell you what, let's go back to this. We're going to plug when in right here. Okay, and then I'm going to underline that. So then I'm going to come down and start my second sentence, and I'm going to say, scientist, I'm going to come down here. Scientist think the megalodons became extinct because that's that transition word right there, that it will fulfill that why question. Okay, so I restated it 2 different times. Excuse me. But when and because designate those 2 different parts of the question. Okay. So let's head right into our story today. We'll go right to page 24. Lots of super cool illustrations here. All kinds of neat animals. I'll do my best to pronounce them as we go back to this page and read. So let's skim as we look for the word aquatic right here. And then we need to find the word whales. Let's see if we can find it on page 25 right here. Okay, so you take a look at both those pages, and I'm going to give you a little story preview. Some aquatic giants of long ago include big sea turtles, swimming dinosaurs, huge dolphin-like reptiles, and primitive whales. So on page 26 and 27, I think that looks like an iceberg to me. So let's see if we need to find a few words here. Let's skim and find the word climate right here, and the word adjust right down here at the bottom. Okay, so when Earth's climate cooled, scientists think the megalodons couldn't adjust. They may have died out, or they could be living somewhere without being noticed. That's kind of an interesting little thought. I'm just wondering if they think they're still living out there somewhere in the ocean and nobody has noticed them. Ooh, check that out. Looks like we've got a boat and a shark. So let's take a look at this timeline. A timeline is a text feature, kind of gives you a lot of information in that timeline. This one is really kind of neat. Looks like we've got some land animals up here. Looks like we have some different types of eras. And then underneath the water, it looks like we have sharks, different types of fish. If you go all the way back here, it says 245 million years ago. It goes all the way to the present. So that timeline has a lot of information in it. Okay. So we'll see what the author shares with us about that timeline and the animals and the different eras that are documented on there. And then the last page, we'll spend a little bit of time reading that. After we get our questions answered, we'll come back and read this, okay? Lots of information here. So we'll read this after we get our questions answered. Okay, so let's go back to page 24. And we're going to start lesson 4 of Megatooth on page 24. Other giants have roamed the seas, but none were as terrifying as the Megalodon. And I'm not going to do a very good job pronouncing these. He was a giant sea turtle. He's 12 feet long, and he lived 70 million years ago. There was an aquatic reptile that lived at the end of the dinosaur age, 46 feet long, and it lived 70 million years ago. That's a crazy looking thing, isn't it? A swimming reptile with a very dolphin-like body was 49 feet long and lived 220 million years ago. Let's try this one. A basilsaurus, a primitive whale, was 49 feet long and it lived 40 million years ago. All of these animals have that "-aurus at the end. Let's try this one again. Elamosaurus, that was the aquatic reptile that lived at the end of the dinosaur age. And then right down here at the bottom, stellar sea cows became extinct only recently. These animals were killed off by hunters in the 1700s, and they lived up to 28 feet long. There's a animal that's still alive today. It's called a manatee, and they call it a sea cow. It looks very much like that, and they live in Florida. So there's an animal still alive today that looks like the stellar sea cows. Scientists think that the megalodons died off about 2 million years ago. The Earth's climate began to get cooler at this time, and so did the oceans. Perhaps the giant sharks just couldn't adjust to the colder waters. About that, I think that answers a question. We'll go back to it in just a minute, okay? That picture's just kind of wiggly, isn't it? Some people think that maybe the megalodons never died off at all after all. Perhaps they are still out there and we just haven't noticed them yet. I don't know how I feel about that. Timeline. This chart shows when different kinds of ancient animals lived. At the end of the Mesozoic era, all of the dinosaurs had died off. The land was left to the mammals to take over. Some people call the Mesozoic era the age of the reptiles and the Cenozoic era the age of the mammals. But sharks of one kind or another swam the seas during both eras. Maybe both eras should be called the age of the sharks. So that's the end of our book. We're going to use the last page, page 32, as lesson number 5. Okay, so let's go back to our questions. Let's go back to our questions. So I'm going to slide the questions over here. How do scientists know how big the megalodons were? Why do they think they were so huge? So let's go. Let's go to let's go, I think we're going to go back to page 22 on this one. How do scientists know how big the megalodons were? Why do they think they were so huge? We're going to go back one couple pages back into yesterday's reading. We read on page 22, a shark, what did a shark as big as a megalodon eat? Whales. Whales started to evolve from land mammals about 55 million years ago. Over millions of years, whales became bigger and bigger. Some scientists think that this was the reason the megalodons evolved to be the bigger and bigger. They needed to be gigantic to feed on their gigantic prey. So we are going to use, scientists know how big megalodons were. We're also going to use that on the second part of our question. Why do they think they were so huge? They think they were so huge because they needed to be gigantic to feed on their gigantic prey. I'm going to go ahead and fill that in for you. I don't think I did a very good job. Be so huge to feed on gigantic prey. Excuse me. So that is the second part of our question. Why do they think they were so huge? They think they were so huge to feed on their gigantic prey. Okay, so that's the second part of the question. The first part says, how do scientists know how big megalodons were? I want you to think a little bit about what we've read up to this point, all of the pictures, all of the references to the megalodon tooth, how they've become fossilized. Okay, so let's look, let's recall a little bit of information. Scientists know how big megalodons were because, let's say, they have studied their fossilized teeth. Okay, so that question, we had to go back in the reading a little bit, so I put it together with you. If we were in the classroom, it'd be a little bit easier for you to follow along with me using the skill packet. So anyhow, that's question 1 with the short written answers. When you're done with both of those, go back and double check them. It's good practice to just to go back and double check your answer against mine as well. Okay, and you'll get in the hang of putting those short written answers together. Okay, so let's go back to question number 2. When and why do scientists think the megalodons became extinct? Extinct is the same thing as died off. So that's on page 26. Scientists think that the megalodons died off about 2 million years ago. The Earth's climate began to get cooler at this time, and so did the oceans. Perhaps the giant sharks just couldn't adjust to the colder waters. So, scientists think the megalodons became extinct when, and then you're going to fill in the answer right here. Okay, and I'm going to, that's where your answer is going to be. The Earth's climate began to get cooler at this time, and so did the oceans. Perhaps the giant sharks just couldn't adjust to the colder waters. So it sounds like the scientists don't really know why they died off, but it was a good idea of why they might have, because the waters got colder. Scientists think the megalodons became extinct because they couldn't adjust to the colder waters. Okay, so you had to use a little bit of information from the sentence to finish the second part of our question. Scientists think the megalodons became extinct because, and I'm going to put the word they right there for you. Okay. The sharks just couldn't adjust to the cooler waters. Sometimes when these questions, when there's these short written answers, it's kind of hard to to do all of this with a virtual lesson. So I want to put a page number there for you. Okay, if you ever have any questions, you can always message me on Remind. I'll be happy to help you in any way I can. Double check your answers against mine on your skill sheet. Do not turn it in. I want you to use your skill packet to take your AR test tomorrow. So double check to make sure you have both pages complete. They should be complete by now. You may use this skill packet to take your AR test as well. So tomorrow we will read the last part of our book on page 32 titled Teeth. We'll do a skill packet review and we'll take an AR test. Thanks a bunch.